Hi, Jack. I'm just so excited to talk to you. We've been chatting for a while before we jumped into this interview, which has just been wonderful. Um, but I just want to say you have a lot of different things on your plate and projects. And so I just want to thank you for taking the time to sit down and have this conversation with me.
Of course. I love the podcast and everything you do. So it's a dream to be here. Thank you.
Oh, I feel like it's been a long time coming too. Like we've been in contact, we've chatted, we've done all the things. And so now it's just really wonderful to have time to learn more about you and all the incredible things you're doing. I shared with Jack before that as I was preparing for this interview, I was on his website and I was like on Instagram. And you have so many incredible facets to your practice that it truly feels like you are one of the few artists that I can say art seems to have weaved itself into everything in your life.
Yeah, 100%. I feel so. I have this uncle who was he was a big sailor, and he loved sailing, and he built a business around making black boxes for giant shipping containers. Like black boxes meaning like the recording of everything that happens on the shipping container. And I thought it's so wonderful that like he mixed his business with the thing that he loves doing. So now every time he's like out sailing, like it's all sort of interwoven. And I think of like it as that lifestyle, like trying to integrate the things that you love to the work that you're doing. I mean, art is such a wonderful thing where it's so elusive, you know. It's supposed to, I think sometimes we forget that it's supposed to be fun, right? Like that it's supposed to be enjoyable. Like we get into these projects and they might not be like they're not always fun, but trying to remember that there should be fun, like getting back into the exciting parts.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, there's moments, and I think as human beings, we do this with almost anything, right? We take it and then we become so serious and we just have to like, oh my gosh, what if I lose it? What if does this? And we need to like, I always think of it as taking the blinders off. You know how they have blinders on horses so they can't see to the sides? I always think of taking it off, looking at the big picture and making it fun, because why else would we can what's going to keep lighting us up and adding the energy to our practice? So I think you have done this beautifully in your work from
I just say we were talking a lot about family, and I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about family because it's so important to my practice. But we were also talking about like our history and triggers, and my mom, who is someone who inspired me to be extremely ambitious, I think, and intellectual. She would always say, just be a little donkey and put your blinders on and get to work. So you just triggered me. And I'm like, I got to get to work.
like where is it? Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, Jack. It is kind of amazing how these things can pop up and how we were discussing family and how I think it's funny you mentioned that about your mom. My dad actually encouraged me to be very ambitious and take risks.
Oh,
That was
yeah.
a part of it was, if you never, what did he say? If you never fall on your ass, then you never tried.
Right?
Which
There's
was
no
good advice.
failure without, no success without failure.
Yeah, yeah. Good advice, but also I think sometimes for kids when they hear all of this, like get your, put that on or you have
Yeah.
to fail. It can really lead to ambitious paths, but also, I don't know, some hardships in there.
Well,
Um,
this has nothing to do with art, but yesterday I took the day off to spend with my kid, and
mhm.
he loves Lego, and we started building it's not a Lego, but it was like very similar, and it was extremely hard, but the robot he was building was extremely cool, and so he kept being frustrated saying he's 7 now, and he kept being frustrated about how hard it was. And I'm like, yeah, but look at how cool it is. And like trying to, yeah, get past that hump of like the difficulty leading to something amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. my daughter, who's the same age, she wants to, well, she's 8 now, but she wants to be an artist someday. And she was drawing and she kept being like, oh, it's not right, and getting really upset. And I didn't want to be overly harsh in response, like, oh my gosh, just make the drawing. But how do you encourage somebody to push through those hardships, in a way that's healthy?
Yeah.
Such a
And
good
doing it
question.
for yourself too, right? I mean, like I have this project where it's it's leaves and it's lots of leaves and it's this like immersive room filled with like plant leaves. And it's so like the end result is kind of it's awesome. Like that's the I love these terms of like awesome or surprise. And I think about that a lot in terms of this particular work, but like the big picture is awesome. Like it's something that's like big and greater. But in order to get there, I need to be in the studio hand cutting like little leaves and like wrapping rope in wire and then painting it. And it's like I have to be the little donkey that puts the blinders on in order to get there. Uh,
Mhm.
and that is, I mean, there is pleasure in that as well. There's like meditative pleasure. I feel like all the different parts of our work does have something in it that is something. It's not that exciting part. It's not um, that like joy that we get from something creative coming or something, or like like moving paint around sometimes is really like exciting, depending on what kind of paint you're moving around. But it is, but it does have that part of it does have a meditative, repetitive function, and that I think is also, I don't know, there's value in a lot of these like aspects, and then they can all come together and you see them in a show, and that's a different value, right? Seeing something that's completed and finding pleasure in your accomplishment. And then after that, seeing other people react to it is also cool. Like, because then that lets you learn more about what you just did.
Mm. I like what you said there, where you're bringing together all these different aspects of pushing paint around, or cutting these leaves, tying it together, all these different things that come into this one piece, which I think really talks a lot about your practice and how you're in these different areas and it comes together. And then you get to see people react to it, which makes me think about a lot of the work that you've recently shared, where you have created spaces that people and children can interact with in a space. And I find that um, so valuable on many different levels. So can you talk about that show and about that work a little bit?
Yeah, so I recently came to an understanding in my work that I make traveling museum shows,
Mhm.
which is such a weird, like not where I thought I was going to be. Um, and it's a really cool place to be. It's also difficult in other regards because I make all this work that I don't want to sell. Um, and that's kind of, yeah, that's a different bag for artist professional careers. But I do work a lot with museums and I work a lot with their education department as well as the curators, and they're sort of different areas in the museum. The education department wants the engagement. Um, and so basically the work we're talking about, since we're on podcast mode, is I had this show where I separated the show into three galleries. The first gallery was something that I called foster paintings. These were 24-inch by 32-inch paintings on velvet. It's like a printed blue velvet. Everything's very blue. It's a printed blue velvet, and it has a abstract gesture in the center. These foster paintings are called that because during COVID, me and my wife became licensed foster parents. That's again a whole other bag that we can get into. The foster world, super interesting. I consider myself an advocate for foster care. I love it. It's such sharing, but it's also extremely complicated. And these works were a part of a meditation on my experience as a foster caregiver. So in this show, there were 30 something foster paintings. We've had, and each painting is a um, is a reference to a phone call we've received by DCF for a child. So every painting is sort of a memory, or a recording in time, or perhaps a branching into a different future. So we get a phone call, like the first of the Foster paintings, there were these two sibling pair that we got a phone call for. That was our first phone call, and one of them was a biter. And I am the nervous one in my relationship, and I'm like, oh, a biter. I don't want a biter. And and my wife was, is the sort of go with the flow kind of one. And she's like, well, all kids are either biters, hitters, or pinchers. So at least like this way, you know what you're getting. Uh, we did not end up taking that placement for other reasons as well, but I made a painting for it. And then through the process of the next 2 years, I made about 40 more of those paintings, each one for a different phone call, some of them extremely complex, like a baby that has severely shaken baby syndrome. Um, Really intense phone call to get, a really intense moment to look into yourself and say, this would change my life. Um, and so how do I even process that? I mean, it's crazy. And that's part of what the studio work is for, is to try and process those emotions. And I will say for the audience that right now we have a 2-year-old foster child that's been with us for about 2 years. His future is still uncertain, which is part of the whole industry and industry, quote unquote industry. And then we've had about 14 emergency placements that are just children who come for the weekend. Something happened at home, they couldn't be there, and so we take them in for a night or to 3 days, and then the DCF finds another place, like a grandma or something. Hopefully that could take them. So that's room number one. Room number two has these large abstracts that are sort of also in the same vein, but talking about healing. And then room number three has this big immersive lounge-like room where I really wanted to create a space that was inviting for children, especially, to come into a museum setting and lounge. There are little bookshelves that have these like cutesy cat-like forms, very My Neighbor Totoro-ish. Is something like these like surrealist cutesy forms are always floating through my mind. And then it has this giant vessel, a big pot with a repeated evil eye motif around it, and then a large tree vine-like thing that grows out of the pot and is actually, I had it growing through the gallery. So it looks like it's growing through the walls of the gallery and taking over the museum. Um, Now, just so I can keep monologuing, the
I love it.
the most exciting thing that I've been doing in the past year um, is something called Smash Art, where I had to sort of arm wrestle the museum a little to get to do this in the museum setting, but I did it very successfully a few times, in one of my last museum shows, and then in a show at the Sugarlift Gallery, where I take down during the show one of the paintings, I take them down and I replace it with a painting that looks very similar, but the surface is not canvas, it's paper mache. And secretly inside the painting is not air, but is candy and streamers. And during the show, I have an event where I invite kids in and I sit them down and I say, we're going to do something really special here. We're going to smash open some art. And one of these paintings is filled with candy, and you guys are going to get to break it open and eat a bunch of candy. And their eyes like light up, and they are feeling like so engaged and actually, I think, feeling seen in this space, which is normally not for them. And it's so amazing and so magical. And anecdotally, my son has been to every one that I've done, and now he goes to a museum. And like we were just at a concert at a museum this summer, and he was like, "Can I go in and look at the art?" And we're like, "No, we're here for the concert outside." And I was like, "What 7-year-old is like, can I go in and look at the art?" Like, I just think it's like now like museums are spaces where he feels comfortable. It's
That's
really
incredible.
shift, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh man, like unpacking just that exhibit right there.
Yeah, we actually had that. So I wanted to leave up the pin. It's smash art, or it's in the vein of pinatas. Um, I'm very cognizant about cultural appropriation, and pinatas are, at once they're sort of in the American lexicon at this point, but they're also, I am not Mexican. Um, and pinatas do also have a long history and blah, blah, blah. So, but they're also really, they're wonderful. And it's like back to the fun, like finding joy in these moments in a gallery space or in a museum. Like, how do you really engage joy?
Mhm.
Um, is hard to do, but when you actually do it, it's wonderful.
Well, I love that there's such a balance too in all of this because this last room is filled with joy. It is an experience that kids take forward with them in their lives, this memory. And it begins in that first room that is incredibly emotionally charged, you
Yeah.
know. Um, that does have beauty, but it has a lot of questions, a lot of emotion. And so I think the way that you set up how somebody kind of travels through this space is incredibly powerful. Do you give a lot of artist talks in these spaces as well and walk people through the exhibit?
I gave about 4 artist talks during this one.
Yeah.
And one of the last one was recorded, and I'm excited to then put that up on my website.
Yeah.
uh, because there's so much unpacking to do, and there's so much more advocacy you can do. And I think, um, art is so weird that like we put up these paintings and we expect everyone to know the whole story somehow, and or we want, at once we want people to just come and react to the painting. And like I just remember from graduate school, people were like, just look at the painting, don't like dig into my history, and like engage with the artwork. But on another point, like there are stories to this, and those stories can be shared, and they can. I guess my work a lot is using the artwork to also tell these stories and to advocate for a better future. So in that, like, it's super important that they're not just aesthetic, even though I don't know, I'm a wacky person, so I'm always juxtaposing, and I find juxtaposition super interesting, and that's what, like, at its core a lot of my work is about. So it's just funny that I made this series that's extremely emotional and story driven and conceptual, but they're also abstract aesthetic pieces. Like they're aesthetic paintings and they're pieces of beauty that should be appreciated on their own. And then I go and I like flip the script and layer this like extremely emotional story upon them.
But I think that's the strength in it, and I agree. There was this academic kind of experience where it's like the painting needs to speak for itself, you know what I mean? Like that whole vibe, and that works for some people. But then there is this ability to use art to advocate and move others, or explore a situation that people may not be aware of but should be aware of. And I think that's what you're really threading this space of making work that is well done, well crafted, you know, like it's gorgeous. But there's also this purpose that it serves, that is just larger than the painting itself, you know. And so I think that that is really wonderful. And I did have a question. I loved how at the very beginning you're like, so I make traveling museum shows. I'm finally come to this conclusion, you know. And I just wonder, from like a personal point, as an artist, as you're growing in your practice, like when did you come to that conclusion, and like how did you come to that?
I came to it in the last 6 months.
I
And so that's new. So like this
love
podcast
it.
is recorded for posterity, and like next year I'm going to be like, what was I thinking? Uh,
Oh,
but you know, I mean, sort of TMI. I had a show at Spring Break Art Show, which I've been working with them for 10 years now. I've been curating shows for them, or with them, for a while, and so this is the second year that I did a solo of my own work for them, and I had these record album covers. It's sort of a again, like juxtaposing. So this museum show is all about these abstracts and very heavy work, and sort of also back to that, like the leaves, like being very crafted and very meditative, and like doing the same thing over and over again. And I wanted to get back into the joy of paint a little more. And so these album covers are doing that. So I'm recreating record album covers, a lot of vinyl that I have at home, and repainting them, and just being very free and making them as sort of painting sketches, but also diving into paint again. As I was saying before, like moving around paint can be really fun and freeing and gestural and freeing for your body, versus some other types of painting. And so like I talk about all this like conceptual stuff, but I'm really like a painting nerd at heart. And paint is like in my soul, because I've been doing it for so long, and I love it so much. And so we were talking about the museum quality, and so we had this show, and it was 100 record album covers, all 12-inch by 12-inch, like very colorful and style flipping. So some were like really realist, and some were very abstract, and some were just gestural line. And so it was received super well, and the audience that came through loved it. Like it really sucked people in a way that art fairs, if anyone who's listening has ever done an art fair, it's a lot of people walking by and glancing and deciding if they want to engage or not, and usually just keep walking, because it's like there's just so much visual information that you have to be selective. And since this was pop album covers, the recognition factor sucked people right in. And people that I saw were going to walk by, and then did a double take and came and engaged. And I thought that that was like such a cool engagement moment in an art fair. On the flip side, almost nothing sold, which may have been the market, may have been the blah, blah, blah. And I'm trying to figure out why, because, you know, again, like in the nitty gritty of career, like they were priced right, this was right, that was right. Um, but it made me realize I don't want to sell these. Like these are 100 record album covers. It would be so cool if there were like 500 of them in the MoMA, and they were like a complete set, and it's like one big artwork. Even though they're all individual paintings, it's like one big artwork, and they're like they can be used educationally. There's like so much that can be said about them. And I'm like, this is another freaking traveling museum show. Like, what did I do? Um, like I just finished this work on foster care, and like those foster paintings are, oh wait, those are a traveling museum show too. I don't want to sell those. Like they're so each so we know, and so emotional, and they all belong together. And then I had this series before that called The Great Americans, where I was painting iconic Americans in like 7 foot tall, like grandiose portraiture. And then before that, I did a series, 48 Jews, which was a collection of famous Jews in the diaspora. And that one, a bunch of those are at the Jewish Museum in New York right now. And like they're they're just like these collections of paintings, but all of them together, all of the paintings in the series make one artwork that then is like bigger than itself.
Mhm.
It's community, I guess. Like my artworks then become their own community, like the paintings become their own community, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, it makes sense. And like they need to be together. And they also they have these incredible themes and narratives that are coming out of them that are only strengthened when they are viewed. And then there's only so many places you can view a ton of paintings in one space, which would be a museum. So it makes sense, you know. Um, I know you also do kind of switching into this you also help artists with their professional practice and teaching and whatnot. And I know that a lot of artists who are listening are like, oh, that's incredible. How did he ever get started with museums? So, kind of putting on that hat a little bit, do you have advice to artists who are listening that want to work with museums a little bit or get their work into that space?
yes. I actually I just I do some like side consulting helping people like work on museum applications and things like that because I that is one of my superpowers apparently. And I mean it's not easy and you definitely need to like my work is built for education departments of museums to embrace.
Mhm.
So I mean knowing your audience is super important. I will say that on the first part where like you're saying that I help other artists career-wise, that my group Public Art for Racial Justice Education, we're based in Connecticut, and I do most of the education for the group. You can find it at racialjusticeart.com or racialjusticeart.org. Both of those work. Uh, and we've been doing career building workshops. And about every month we have a guest speaker. We just had one on gallery artist relationships, and how to even understand what it means to work with a gallery. And then the next one is coming up in January 22nd, I believe. And that one is going to be on how to contact the galleries. So we've had how to, what do the galleries do? And next we're going to do how to contact them. All that said, these workshops are free. Um, the last one we had, we started charging $5 suggested donation, and just so people had some money in the game. Like it's when you offer things, I've just been learning that when you offer things for free, people don't appreciate it. And so because of the equity though, we said, here's a code that you can use for free. And I think about like 70% of the people signing up signed up for pay.
Mhm.
But then all the workshops are also available offline or online. And so for posterity, my goal is end of 2024 to really build a free curriculum for artist professional development. Um, Erica, why am I doing this? I guess I love the idea of community. Like I feel kind of lonely in the studio sometimes, and
Yep.
I love having fellow artists surrounding me and giving back to them is great. But it is another thing that I do on top of like extreme childcare. I call like fostering is like extreme childcare. Um,
Well, there's so many moving parts, I would assume, in foster care, like getting those phone calls, you know, and so like people like to have a schedule and got a schedule. We drop off the kids, we're doing this. And then, you know, you don't know what's happening out in the world. And there's something that happens to a kid and they need a place to go. So I feel like there's a lot of levels that you're responding to, but I think it also comes from like a place of service in some ways, such as this, what you're creating. It provides, it helps people, and it is a service. And I think, you also are creating communities and supporting others. So I think it's really incredible. And that's why when I was going through your website and everything, I was like, I could ask like 40 million questions about all the different things that you're doing. But I do think that that's the core, like the thread, that brings it all together is being an artist who cares,
Yeah.
about others. So
Yeah. Yeah. I think caring and giving is definitely something that's very important to me. I keep thinking about values, like what are my values? And oftentimes I actually also don't know my values. Like this goes back to what we were talking about, the different parts of creating artwork that give you different things. And I'm like looking at what my values, like a list of values, and I'm like, well, sometimes I have this value and sometimes I have that. Sometimes I want to be giving and sometimes I need to like close up like a little clam and not let anyone in. Sometimes I need to work more harder on my financials, but sometimes I need to work harder on my family. Like
yep.
it's not like, I don't know, I guess we have this notion that things need to be static. I talk about it a lot in this museum show about like no, like normative narratives and like especially like also with family, like we think that um having a family is two people meet, they have kid, and I talk about it in terms of caveman voice. Two people meet, they have kid grows up, kid leaves house at 18, um life goes on. Like that's, but that's like 90% of the people I know, that's not their story.
No.
um and like it's so complicated. Sort of these the vines to me are telling this story of like winding paths, and our journeys are more like a road trip than a ladder. That like, you don't know your final destination, and it might be different at different times. Like values, they change during the week, or once you've accomplished a little bit of one, then you do the other. And like in the studio, once you've done a little bit of the the nitty gritty work, or the the repetitive work, then you want to do something freeing. And I think it's okay to embrace that sort of vining or waffling or whatever we call it.
Well, that keeps the joy in it too, I think, because I agree. We have this idea like A is going to be B follows A, then we have C, then we move on to this. And it is never like that. In fact, I had this meeting with a mentor of mine who, was a faculty member. We're still close, studio visits, all of that. And he was like, have you ever heard the saying that the easiest way, okay, you come in here really fast. That
So, so Erica's kid just came in, and I want to note for all the podcast listeners that it is okay to have family and be a professional. And and I remember there was a talk by Sarah Jimenez, gave a talk. She's a wonderful artist, and I forget where she was. She was at Cornell, I think, and she gave a talk with her kid, her like 1.5-year old, like in a papoose, I think, like on
I
the stage.
Well, I remember hearing about Michelle Grabner like breastfeeding while doing critiques and whatnot. And I thought, yes,
Yeah.
finally, like there has to be a normalization of this to be able to allow people to grow. Because like you were saying, we have this idea of what everything should look like. That's the voice I use when I'm going into that world, with the hand gesture. And it never looks like that. It's not reality. And the sooner we can kind of embrace that, normalize it, is huge. Like I started to look back and think about the women professors that I had, and if they had ever talked about, and because the men did, I felt like men kind of talked a little bit about their children, just dropping it in, but I noticed women didn't. And so again, these narratives that get pushed into our experience that we then have to kind of deconstruct, I think is huge. But
That's
um
fascinating. I wonder why the men, I mean, I guess everyone is different, right? But like, were they signaling that like I'm part of a childcare team too with or
I think it's just more ingrained for men to be able to talk about having children without it negatively impacting their career, you know? Like it was expected for Mr. Jones to have children and a wife, and he goes off to his job. And again, this is a while ago. This isn't, I'm not really talking about as recent now.
yeah.
But you know, women would hide the fact that they had children because in the art world, because it would negatively impact their career. So I think there's a hangover from that that we're currently battling. Um, that being said, I love that this is actually the first podcast, though, where one of my kids has actively been present.
So you
So,
had a child on your lap?
uh,
So
yeah,
you have a child on your lap. Yeah, that's wonderful. It's a wonderful thing. I mean, inviting kids into your space is amazing and it's disruptive and it's but it's great for them. It's great for other people to see that you can have also kids in your space, right? Like
yeah,
and be
and
a public
embracing the
figure.
mess, which I feel you were bringing into the a fun, joyful mess in the museum shows that you're doing. You know, um,
And
so
letting go is something that I talk to my therapist a lot about. And it's really important and it's hard as an artist especially to let go. Um, I think a lot about like all the little like tiny things in my artwork that like mean such a huge deal to me, but like other people don't really care about.
right.
And it's like crazy, but then like what if I let go of those and what if like it wasn't as important? Um and and like the like if I didn't mention it, your kid would probably like the times when he talked during this podcast would be edited out and then like and everyone would go on without even knowing that there was a kid around. Like it's just an amazing thing, right?
Well, I think it's something you mentioned as well about like the things we hold on to, is this idea of holding on to things tightly, you know, like even like where you're afraid to let go of it, you're afraid to let it kind of create itself or be itself or know that it wasn't really yours, you know.
Mhm.
And that's something else I think about in my practice, and I think you do as well, you know, and therefore embracing the mess. And um it even makes me think of that book. What was the book? Oh no, I'm not going to remember. About the ideas that are floating out in the world, and some people grab them and use them, and then or they don't, and then somebody else grabs it. Somebody will DM us or on Instagram about the title of the book when this goes live. But it makes me think of that as well, as we move into our work. Like, what ideas are they ever really ours? I don't know.
Yeah.
Um,
I've just been I had some minor health issues recently and I learned how to use a foam roller.
hmm.
Very exciting. And I don't know if you've ever thought that I Like Your Work podcast would start talking about foam rollers. But the thing that I'll say about it, I was talking to a physical therapist, and he's like, yeah, the purpose of the foam roller is to put some pressure on, and of course, someone's going to write in and tell me, no, Jack, that's wrong. But the purpose is to put some pressure on the muscle so that you can remind the muscle how to let go,
Hmm.
remind the muscle how to relax afterwards. And maybe kids are a type of foam roller where they can remind us how to let go and how to relax. And like we don't need I mean, eating is such a huge thing with kids and like such a huge thing for me. And like controlling someone else's eating is like one of the most messed up things. um and like just being able to like do good enough is
Yeah,
like really important in that regard.
yeah, and riding this line of wanting them to eat something healthy, and all they want to do is like eat crackers, and you're like, you've got to have, you know, all of that. But I love that idea of reminding you to let go, like that foam roller. And I do think kids are that. Um, I was having this thought recently about kids with special needs. A lot of women, a few of my good friends have kids who have special needs.
Me
And
too.
it's not something you exactly plan on, right? But buddy, hold on one second. But I started thinking of them as love expanders.
Oh yeah.
Like you have this child you love, you will do anything for. It is not what you planned on. It is not what you want to do. And I'm not trying to romanticize this exactly
Yeah,
either,
yeah,
because
yeah.
there's
No,
a lot of realities.
yeah.
But yeah, how it expands our capacity to care.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, you're talking to somebody who never thought they'd even have kids, but also then went into foster, and and how do they, and like, I just think my heart just keeps growing and growing and growing, and like I remember there was something like, I'm not religious-y, but it was someone was saying something like God will only give you as much responsibility as you can handle, but your capacity to handle will grow and grow the more you get. And I think of that in terms of my heart, like just keeps growing and growing. Like people say, how could you have a kid come into your house and then say goodbye to them? And it's hard. I mean, I'm not romanticizing it as like being easy, but it's also your heart grows, like your capacity to care grows, your capacity to also to let go and see things like not under your control is like an amazing like internal process, right? But we also, so talking about letting go, we have a child with special needs, and um learning that like we're trying to fix a problem with extra care or whatever, but the problem isn't going to be fixed.
Yeah.
um and like so like speech therapy, like we have like severe apraxia, and so no matter how much, like I've been doing speech therapy for years with my kid, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be like a one for one in fixing things. And no matter how much work I'm putting into it, he might end up it might end up getting fixed at its own rate, or not.
Mhm.
um and I have to let go of like my controlling aspect of like feeling like I am. And I guess, like, I mean, since this is an art podcast, like painting is also similar sometimes, where like I want to control everything on the canvas, but sometimes not being in control makes for a better painting, and allowing the paint to do its own thing makes for a better image. um
You just made me realize something, which I love, because I completely agree. Like you ha you only have so much control as a parent, right? Things happen that you want to change. We had some issues with my third child being born, where there were some outcomes that we want to change or wanted to change, but they may never change. We don't know. And that's a really hard spot to be in as a person, mostly a doer and a fixer, which I think you and I can both maybe be under that mantle. But my paintings shifted as well, where it was like, let the process lead it, and you got to be a little bit more responsive and not as holding on to everything. So I love that you're bringing these two things together, the art and what you were talking about, and then how your life and being a foster parent, giver, all these things um, impacts the work in a way, you know. I think that's really, really wonderful. And
and
I
if you
know
want to take it also to the level of career, like applying to crap. Like I just had someone call, like talking to me about how they applied to something and they really thought they were going to get it and got rejected. And it's like, also back to your, like, if you don't try, then you'll never get it. But like, you also have to let go that, like, it's not up to you to get accepted to these things, or like, like being someone um, who works with museums a bunch, like it's not necessarily up to me to get the museum show. Like you put yourself out there, but like it, it's not under your control that you're going to get all the things,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Got to let it go, put it out there. I do think of myself as a spiritual person, to be honest, which happened after I had kids, interestingly enough, like this idea of like, okay, I can put this out there and I've done what I can and I've done it. I hope to have done it well, but it's not up to me. We'll see what happens. I think it's really true. And I was wondering, do you feel like becoming a parent impacted um, the area of curation? Because I know you curate a lot of exhibitions and you have these community-based projects that you do. Do you feel like becoming a parent impacted that as well?
I mean, it gave me a lot less time to do. Um, I mean, yeah, so like logistically, it definitely impacted because I had to make decisions of like, am I putting things into my art bucket? Am I putting things into the curation bucket? Um, but I mean, emotionally, I mean, they sort of started happening around the same time. I really started digging into curation when my wife got pregnant that first time. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, I think that idea of giving sort of started then. I think I was a very solipsistic artist, um, before 2010 maybe. And then I started more and more learning the joys of giving, and now I think I'm giving too much at this point, and I need to walk that back a little bit and start saving some for myself. In foster care, they say you can't pour from an empty cup,
Mhm.
and that's and my cup is like has a giant hole in the bottom. It's like
Mhm.
give, 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 but it's also feeding to give. So that's where it's hard to say no. We were talking earlier before the recording, but the I had a dinner with a local government person, and he's like, "Jack, you do so much cool stuff. Do you ever think about like being involved in local government?" And I pretty much yelled at him, "No!" And yeah, like hard no, and like everyone kind of like stopped in the room, and I was like, it, like it's my internal voice that came out, and I need to start to saying no, which is hard to do when you see people with needs and you want to give um and you want to be welcoming, but the whole community thing, I mean, community makes you stronger.
Mhm.
So it is good, and I would consider local government at some point once other things go off the plate. That's like, yeah, that's my other side being like, maybe, and I was like scratching my chin, but then I need that little Jack on my shoulder to say no,
Yeah.
like don't do that. He needs like a little ruler or something to smack me
Well,
with.
it comes back to timing too, and I think that there's when we get turned down for projects, it feels like, oh, why did I get that? But really, sometimes it's like this blessing that was like, you don't need anything else. Like, I've done you a favor. You can't take on this thing. So I feel like sometimes getting those no's can be a good thing, mostly for artists who are very invested in community, who are always kind of giving. And I think a lot of times when the art world sees artists like that occasionally, then everybody kind of comes in, and there has to be a balance. There has to be a balance of also where somebody checks in on the caregiver or the giver. I have this one artist who I've become friends with through the podcast and through the membership. And she sent me this message just out of nowhere, just saying, Erica, you give a lot. And I just wanted to make sure somebody was checking in on you too. And it really hit me, in a way where I was like, we need to check in on the people who are creating spaces like you know, just in terms of keeping things balanced emotionally, I think, so that you can continue to give and curate and, be active in this incredible space that you've helped create that serves artists, the public art for racial justice education space, creative lattice that you do, all of these wonderful things. But now I want to take it back a little bit more to, and we're going to kind of roll out on this one. What does a day in the studio look like for you? Because I know you are balancing a lot of things, and I'm sure your studio day shifts, but maybe you could describe a typical day if you could, or a recent day, or
Well, lots of anecdotes, but a few weeks ago I was giving an artist talk, and it was a virtual artist talk. And right before the talk, the daycare calls and is like, "Your kid's sick, come and get him," like an hour before the talk, and I'm like, "Oh, geez." So that's kind of like a typical day. Is like life starts throwing rocks at you, and you need to catch them and then make some sort of artwork out of this collection of rocks, and maybe one of them will be a geode. I don't know. Like, um, I think that's that's the world we live in. One of my problems is that I throw a lot of spaghetti on the wall, I call it, and there's always projects that are sort of coming back around, and I need to decide if I want to be doing those. Um, but on a daily basis, so back to your question, I wake up with the kids way too early. I take them into school and daycare. Recently, I've started doing a small workout right after, because that's, self-care.
yeah.
Uh, Very important. And then I get to the studio and I have a big reminder on my computer, don't get lost in your computer. Because email just like sucks the life out of you. And so that's important. And then I have a goal of these days I have a goal of making 4 record paintings per day.
Oh,
Uh,
that's awesome. That's incredible.
Not making, it's like the first, putting a first layer on, because I have a potential big show coming up with those. But then also I just deinstalled the show, so I need to find storage space for all of my art, which is a whole other, we can have a whole podcast on finding storage space. And then normally, that's studio time. If I can do 2 hours of creative work while sitting in the studio, I consider that a win. Even though I might be sitting in the studio for like 5 hours, like it's uh it's really like challenging to not get lost in the logistics and the emails and the reaching out and the trying to like not beat myself up for not posting on Instagram and the like all that stuff. I finish by like 5 or 6 ish, and make dinner, or my wife is making dinner. One of us is Someone's figuring out dinner for for the gang. And then the night happens. Put kids to bed. Often our 7-year-old is in bed by 8 or 9. I'm getting like way too
Oh, I love
too.
it. As a parent artist, and many people listening are parent artists, they're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I
Yeah.
get that. So yeah.
And then I beat myself up for a few minutes about not working more. But I'm like in bed with a snuggly kid, and I'm like, I just can't. And it's like 9 o'clock, and I move him to his bed, and I read terrible sci-fi. And, like it's my way of shutting my brain down
I get it. I get it.
for another like 45 minutes and drift off into sleep, where I try not to have anxiety dreams about the next day.
It's funny you talk about the beating yourself up and then reading really bad sci-fi. I have had a similar thing recently where I'm like, you need to be reading art books before bed, because I like to read before bed, and I read all kinds of different things. I love biographies sometimes, or, really bad, like recently I've just read a couple of really bad, like murder mysteries, and I'm like, you are going to take this book that I've been meaning to read, and you're going to read that, and then I never do it, and so I beat myself up over that. So I get it, the guilt. Why do we give ourselves this guilt? Like
Yeah.
we need to let it go.
And it's like, well, I think the big problem is with you and me is that we're overachievers who are doing too much, and we're not giving ourselves enough credit for the things that we are doing. So like just putting your kid to bed is a achievement. Keep it, and like getting the kids to school on time is an achievement. Um, and all the other like small little caretaking things that we do is, it's amazing. But we don't tell ourselves that that is one of the things that we're doing. So like it's just Hanukkah now, and my kid is getting so many presents because also his birthday was right before Hanukkah, and he has so much stuff. He has this like backlog of Lego that he needs to build. And I'm like, we need to write down all of the gifts that you've gotten so that we can be a little more grateful about some of about all so how you have so much. And I think that I have like an active journaling process, and I do try and write down um the gratuity stuff that like these are all the things that I'm doing, even though and we haven't even gotten into Chat GPT, which I love, but I do try and write down all the things I've done in my journal. And then for our viewing audience, I also sometimes then run my journal through ChatGPT to get a better understanding of what I'm doing. And my therapist says it's a horrible HIPAA mistake, but I don't really care. Their technology's already running my life. Um, but I think I don't know. It's like it's so cool to like get more insight and to see like caretaking is a huge part of my life. Why don't I give myself credit for that? Um, I don't know.
Yeah. I like you mentioning your journaling practice, because I feel like for me, that's something that has really helped me, um, just as a caregiver, an artist, doing all the things. And you had mentioned, you want me to put that over there? Um, One of the things my therapist shared with me that I didn't realize was just like getting all the junk out of my head and moving my hand while writing it, like allowed me to process things in a different way by like connecting different sides of my brain, all these good things. So I think it's like such a wonderful practice that you have there, in terms of like, at least we're working towards giving ourselves grace in these areas of not being like, oh my gosh, always having to do more and more. And I think for people listening who may be in a similar situation, I hope that this helps them. I think a lot of caregivers feel guilt, creative caregivers especially, for not being with their kids more, or not being in the studio more. And you can't win that battle, like, um, so I hope you and I both, and all the people listening in a similar situation, can just maybe breathe a little easier knowing that we're not alone in it, and that what we're creating is good enough, and it's also a season, like it's not forever. That's something I keep thinking about, like it's not forever.
Enough is good enough. I mean, that's sort of I mean, it's sort of on the flip side, but in foster care, with the emergency placements, we have a kid come in for a day and then they leave and we never hear of them again. And the first few times we did that, I felt so bad that I didn't give them more. But I talked to an artist friend that was like, I had a really traumatic childhood, and going to my aunt's house for one day, I so remember like being in a safe space and how that one moment was more memorable than some of like the trauma I was going through. And and that's, I mean, the flip side of like my crazy busy life, and for the people listening that have crazy busy lives, is also just doing a little bit of something is good enough too. Like, like just making one artwork and then spending the rest of your day reading, like that's also good enough. Like, I don't know. It's just, I just wanted to say, for the people out there that don't have like crazy full, like crazy lives, and aren't like people who throw spaghetti all over their walls. I mean, now I have spaghetti all over my wall. Like, who wants that? But for for somebody that's just like making a plate of spaghetti and eating that too, like that's, I don't know, that's great. And that's what the journaling can like really show you, that like you're also, that it all has value. Like living a life has value, and that's great.
Yes, living a life has value within itself. Like each life has value. I
Yeah.
agree. It doesn't, I think we have such a internalized, for whatever reason, whatever background, a bit of like, the more we do, the more our worth is, but that's not really true. you know, and breaking that down, I think is important for all of us. And it kind of leads me though, talking about all of this leads me to one of the questions I love to ask artists. And I feel like we've covered a lot of this, but I want to say, has there been advice that you've received from someone, maybe it's a mentor, maybe a parent, maybe any, friend, that has really stuck with you and that you would like to share with the listeners?
Geez, putting me on the spot.
I know, right? But I feel like we've offered a lot of things
So
so
many
far.
gems. I think, I mean, really, I'm just like thinking about the little version of me on my shoulder saying no.
Mhm.
It's like, and carving space out for yourself. I think that's super important. It's for the busy, for the people that fill their plates too much, like scraping some of that off and carving out a little space for yourself, I think is really important. And it's okay to like, also like for people with kids, like to want time away from your kids is like normal and natural, as well. um so yeah, I think yeah, I guess I think like saying no is important. um yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Yeah. What's the saying? Like, if it's not a hell yes, it's a hell no. Like in anything in between, like, and I like that. I try to think of myself, if I'm not like, yes, that's excellent. If I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I should probably do it. Like, okay, maybe not right now. Like, so I think that's really great advice. Well, Jac, I could talk to you for hours, seriously, and I would love to have you back at some point to talk more about everything that you're creating, because this has just been a wonderful conversation that I feel like has offered a lot of value to listeners who may be in the thick of things. So I just want to say thank you for, again, taking the time out of that busy day and spaghetti throwing to be here.
My pleasure. Well, thank you for having me, and I love the podcast. And again, if people want to go look at some of these talks that I've been running, both my website at creativelattice.com, and then um, racialjusticeart.com, they both have a lot of the content on there.
Great, great. And we'll definitely put those in the show notes, everyone. And where else can we find you and your work online? Like
Oh,
Instagram or website?
too many places. On Instagram at Jac Lahav, and that's JACLAHAV. And then my website, jaclahav.com. Yeah, those are the appropriate spots online.
Prime locations. Well, guys, we will be sharing Jac's work over on Instagram. I Like Your Work podcast, and of course, have his websites that he's mentioned and his contact information in the show notes and over on the website. So, again, Jac, I just want to say thank you again, and that I hope you have a really great week.
Thanks.
Bye.